Hey, how's it going guys? Captain Kuba here and welcome to another God of War video. As you guys know, ever since God of War Ragnarok released, I've been somewhat obsessed with finding the remnants of the original sequel to God of War 2018. Unfortunately, Santa Monica has kept their mouth closed regarding this topic for the most part, which is understandable. But this wasn't always the case. If you watch some old interviews or even read the art books, you will find a plethora of cut content that will make you wonder, what if these characters were added to the game? I can't be the only one who finds this topic interesting, so in this video, I decided to compile every mythological character that has been cut from this series, including one from God of War Ragnarok. If you guys end up liking this video, I could also release a list talking about the original cut characters from the series, such as the Marked Warrior clones from God of War 3. So if you want to watch that list, make sure to hit that like button so I know whether or not to make that video. But with that said, here are 10 mythological characters that were cut from the God of War series. In Greek mythology, Artemis is the goddess of the hunt, and is one of those characters that every God of War fan wishes would be in the series. And while it's true that she does have a role in God of War 1, I guess that counts, at least I wish her role was bigger given that she's one of the top badasses of the Olympian pantheon. And interestingly enough, she almost did. Back when Santa Monica was brainstorming ideas for the next game in the series, God of War Ascension, the plan was to make it the biggest God of War game ever by splitting development into 3 parts. The usual single-player campaign, the multiplayer mode, and a co-op mode which would have players take control of Kratos and Artemis as they went on dangerous missions in the name of Olympus. Now this Artemis wouldn't be your typical bipedal Olympian deity. Thanks to the art book, we've learned that Artemis was originally designed as a centaur type of creature, half woman, half lion. Images in the art book also show that Artemis could cling onto pillars and reach places Kratos couldn't, most likely gameplay mechanics that were planned for her character. This project sadly got cut for multiple reasons. First, the PlayStation 3's technology didn't allow for realistic rotation of characters. When Kratos rotates in the games, it's not that noticeable, but if you have a 4-legged animal rotate, it becomes too obvious. The other reason was simply time. Developing both a single-player campaign and a multiplayer mode was already difficult enough. Throwing in a co-op mode would simply be impossible to achieve in a timely manner. So the hard decision was made to cut this mode entirely. I find this really sad because while I like the multiplayer of God of War Ascension, I think a co-op game would fit more with the God of War IP. Who knows, maybe this could be something we'll get in the future thanks to the PS5 specs. I'm not asking specifically for this game, but just a co-op experience would be nice. Next we have Archimedes, and I should say right away that Archimedes isn't a mythological character, but his real life story is the stuff of legends. Now, I could bore you with an awesome yet long and boring math class explaining his genius, but I think it's better if I leave it at this. Archimedes is considered one of the greatest mathematicians in history. Is that not a good enough description for you? Well, screw you. Get it? Because he was famous for his hydraulic screw? Anyways, his genius must have carried over to his God of War counterpart, as Archimedes was given the task to build a massive statue in honor of the god Apollo. In the final game, we come across a couple of his letters and eventually find his corpse. But originally, Archimedes was going to play a bigger role, a role that is still somewhat obscure. In the art book, the only thing we learn about this character is that he was going to be in a cinematic in which he would explain to Kratos who he was as well as the backstory behind the statue. However, in one of his designs, Archimedes is seen holding something called a surveyor tripod, which has lenses very similar to the last puzzle in the game. So it's possible that Archimedes was going to properly explain how these dual realities actually work. But because his character was cut at the last minute, the explanation went with it, leaving us with one of the most confusing puzzles in the series. I can't say for sure, but it would have been nice to learn what his role was going to be. Who knows, maybe his presence in the game would have helped the pacing of the story. Next we have Phobos. In Greek mythology, Phobos is one of the lesser known Olympian deities. This is mostly because his role in the story is to accompany his more powerful father, Ares. But still, the idea of fighting the god of fear is something that Santa Monica wasn't easily going to pass on. The thing that would set Phobos in God of War Ascension apart from his character in Greek mythology were his damage stages. The first time the player would encounter him, he would have the appearance of a giant Greek warrior, which in my opinion is already a really awesome design for a God of War character. But the artists at Santa Monica were planning to take him one step further. As the player dealt more damage to him, Phobos' body would start to peel off until he was nothing but a huge undead ethereal being. We don't know if he was going to be one of the multiplayer bosses or one from the single player campaign. However, in the art book, Kratos' silhouette is placed next to him, which tells me he was most likely going to be a boss fight in the single player campaign. This cut character makes me truly sad, because the bosses in God of War Ascension are not the greatest in the series. Maybe having this Greek god thrown in there would have helped this problem. I also think he would have been a really interesting character in the story, as he would have been Orko's brother. But unlike his brother, Phobos could have also been a marked warrior wanting to prove his worth to his father by killing the true marked warrior. I wonder if this character was cut because God of War 3 deals with Kratos overcoming fear itself, and they couldn't have him defeat the god of fear many years before. I don't know, whatever the reason is, it doesn't matter. I still wish we would have seen him somehow. In Greek mythology, Pelops was a bit of a tragic character to say the least. His father Tantalus cooked and chopped him into little pieces to feed to the gods of Olympus. Tantalus did this to test the gods' powers of observation. However, every god noticed what they were about to eat and naturally stopped, except the goddess Demeter, who was so saddened by the loss of her daughter that she continued to eat Pelops' shoulder. This was a problem because when the gods decided to put his body back together, his shoulder was missing. So Demeter stepped in and gifted him with a replacement made of ivory. Now, Pelops was set to make an appearance in God of War 2. And although nothing is known about his role in the game, we can see that Santa Monica was definitely going for a darker tone, as his body parts weren't put back together in the most neatly way. But hey, at least his ivory shoulder was going to make an appearance. Now, while nothing of this character remains in the game, I want to point out that Callisto's monster form might have taken some inspiration from him, so I guess in a way he made it into the series. Next we have IXION, a very interesting character in Greek mythology. I would go into the whole story regarding his stolen horses and what happened to him after, but that would take too long. What you need to know is that Zeus took pity on IXION after being exiled from his kingdom. Zeus invited him to a banquet on Olympus, but instead of eating, IXION put all of his efforts into sleeping with Hera, Zeus's wife. Once Zeus found out about his behavior, he commanded Hermes to tie IXION to a fiery wheel that would go back and forth in the heavens for all eternity. Sometimes when Zeus would get bored of seeing him in the sky, he would send him and his wheel to the underworld. Whatever the changes to his locations didn't really matter that much, because IXION would be eternally punished in this fiery wheel. IXION was set to make an appearance in God of War 3 in the form of a puzzle. Now, even though the surviving footage of this puzzle doesn't have the best quality, we can clearly see Kratos spinning him around and consequently drowning him in the process. A very Kratos way of dealing with puzzles. This puzzle was going to be located after the Centaur fight in Tartarus, but before the gates of Tisiphone. And although nothing of this puzzle remains in God of War 3, the character model used for IXION was later reused for the Martyrs puzzle in God of War Ascension, which is a pretty cool way of putting to use cut content from a game into another. Next we have Hercules, and I know what you're going to say. Why is Hercules on this list? He clearly made it into God of War 3. And while you're right, this isn't the full story behind the most famous Greek hero. I can't remember where Corey talked about this, so you can choose to believe me or not. But in an interview, Cory Barlog talked about how Hercules was initially going to be in God of War 2. However, he wouldn't be a boss fight like in God of War 3. Kratos would come across Hercules holding a great weight, maybe a platform or a really heavy gate. Initially, he would beg Kratos to help him, but Kratos as always would find a way to add more weight to him, which would result in a very painful and crushing death. I gotta say, out of all of the cut characters from the list, this is one I'm glad was cut, because the fight with him in God of War 3 is just phenomenal. OCEANUS was the eldest son of Gaia and Uranus, who alongside his brothers and sister ruled the world before the Olympians overthrew them. Oceanus, if the name hasn't given him away, is the god who ruled over the oceans before Poseidon took his job. In God of War 2, Oceanus was set to make his first debut in the cutscene of the Great War. Originally, this cutscene was going to be much longer, and one of the characters that was eventually cut from it was the Titan Oceanus. The character was simply cut because his model would have been way too expensive to build, as well as very time consuming. So Santa Monica decided to keep him as a character for the 2D portion of the cutscene, which would look very similar to the flashback scenes in God of War 1. But sadly for this character, those 2D scenes were also cut from the final game. Now, even though this version of Oceanus is one of the coolest designs in the God of War series, I'm not too bothered by his absence, because during the development of God of War 3, Santa Monica would take inspiration from his character design to create Poseidon's water form, which looks just as cool, if not cooler in my opinion. Now it's time to talk about the mythological character whose name I have the hardest time pronouncing. Razelverg, I think? Not much is known about Razelverg in Norse mythology. The only thing we can attribute to him is that he's the creator of the winds. That's pretty much it, and his name also means corpse swallower. Now, much like Hercules, this character did eventually make it into the game, but in a very different manner. In God of War 2018, Ragnarok simply sits in the background, occasionally flapping his wings to provide the winds of Helheim. But originally this bird was going to be a boss fight. Due to money issues as well as time constraints, this boss was replaced with another troll boss fight, which is really disappointing, because I think the pacing in God of War 2018 would have been greatly improved by having 2 more bosses. One in Tyr's Temple and one in Helheim, and a fight with this giant being would definitely get the job done. If anyone from Santa Monica is watching this, I would pay good money to watch this cut boss fight, whatever footage you guys have left. And now we've reached the character from God of War Ragnarok, and of course, I'm talking about Sinmara. Sinmara is one of those characters we don't know much about. Just like in the game, Sinmara is the wife of Surtur and also the keeper of Loki's weapon, Leviathan, no relation to the Leviathan axe that we know of. Now in the game, when Kratos and Atreus travel to Muspelheim, they try to convince Surtur to help them by becoming Ragnarok itself. Surtur explains that this can only happen by combining his heart with Sinmara's, but doing so it would cost Sinmara's life. So what does Surtur do? He thinks outside the box and uses Kratos' Blades of Chaos as a stand-in for his fiery heart, meaning that he will become Ragnarok without killing Sinmara. However, in the original game, what would have happened is that upon Kratos stabbing Sinmara's heart with the Blades of Chaos, Surtur would have died. Atreus then would resort to trickery by telling Sinmara that Odin was the one to kill Surtur, and that the right thing to do was to combine Surtur's heart, which she would have, with her heart, which could be found with Surtur's remains. Kratos would not approve of his son's actions, but then Atreus would remind his father of something he told him a long time ago.
Close your heart to it.
This is why in the final game there's a moment where Kratos explains to Atreus that he shouldn't close his heart to people suffering. He should instead open it because that's the mark of a good person. Having this whole section with Sinmara would have definitely helped the ending feel more earned, but it most likely got cut because the game's length would have been extended for too long. So the decision was made to cut it and hope players remember this line from God of War 2018. The whole story behind Sinmara's cut is very interesting. If you want to learn more about it, I suggest you watch the video by the guy who discovered it. The link for it will be in the description below. Now, the last character I have to talk about is a weird one, because no images nor footage still survive of it. The only way we came to know about this character is thanks to David Jaffe in an interview with all the God of War directors, in which he said that Cory Barlog was originally planning on finishing Kratos' story by turning him into death itself, also known as the Grim Reaper. He would have done this by melting both Blades of Chaos and forming the scythe we know as the Grim Reaper Scythe, and Kratos himself would become Death. That's pretty much all we know. It's a really interesting idea, but I'm really glad it didn't go through, as I'm much more happy with the story of God of War 2018 and God of War Ragnarok. But I can't lie that seeing a cutscene in which Kratos turns into death itself wouldn't have been cool. So there you have it guys, 10 mythological characters that were cut from the God of War series. If I had to pick a favorite, I would say Phobos. That whole concept with the boss fight just sounds amazing. But what do you think? Which one of these characters was your favorite one? Which one of them would you have liked to see in the game? Whatever your thoughts and theories are, there's no theories here, but whatever your thoughts are, make sure to leave them in the comments section below. As always, I want to give a big thanks to all of my members for supporting the channel monthly. People like Hitman himself, Burst Righteous 941, Mike Who, Alois Mock, Yankee King, Gypsy Boy, Aaron EY, and Mustafa Alpart, to name a few, are the biggest reason this channel is still going on. So please, continue to support it. I would also like to thank everyone who likes and shares my videos. I know it doesn't seem like much, but hey, trust me, it really does help. And with that said, thanks for watching, and remember, go forth in the name of Olympus.